You keep disguising self-abandonment as goodness, hoping people will finally value your sacrifice. What you call virtue is self-erasure. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who charted the hidden architecture of the psyche. The loneliness of that bargain lingers, long after the applause fades. At first, it seems small, letting a need go unmet, brushing aside a boundary, one compromise at a time. But each act of invisible giving turns the dial, pulling self further from center. In absence, memories, dreams, reflections, this paradox of looking inward and outward is made clear. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. The ache is subtle, layered under the mask of goodness. Outwardly, there's praise, a rush of relief every time someone calls you generous or selfless. You clasp these scraps of affirmation, stacking them to build a sense of worth. Yet nothing sticks. The emptiness inside only spreads. It's not just about other people's praise, though. There's a quiet dread beneath every exchange. If you ever stopped earning your place by erasing your needs, would anyone stay? The praise feels conditional. Your value seems to depend on how little you take up space. Then comes the deeper complication. Holding your goodness hostage to others' approval becomes its own trap. In the same book, another warning lands squarely. The pendulum of the mind oscillates between sense and nonsense. Every sacrifice risks swinging wildly between clarity and confusion. Moments of purpose blur with moments of self-doubt. You second-guess every gesture. Is this true kindness or desperation to be wanted? Doubt gnaws after every yes you couldn't say no to. Internally, the cost grows. Over time, a pattern forms. Resentment curdles beneath the surface. There's a private fury at never being chosen, never being the one whose needs matter. You begin to wonder if all this goodness is just a mask, a kind of performance that no longer fools anyone, least of all yourself. These choices aren't born from nowhere. Often, they are stitched together in childhood, in families where love came with strings attached. Maybe you learned that belonging meant blending in, holding your tongue, shrinking beside louder needs. Survival meant self-betrayal, dressed as harmony. The pattern gets ingrained. Don't make waves. Don't draw attention. Keep peace at any cost, even the cost of your own voice. Later, the world seems to reward this posture. Teachers, bosses, partners, all cherish a helper, a fixer, a yes person. The harder you work to be good, the less room you have to simply be human. Internally, it's not nobility that fuels this cycle. It's fear. The belief that your true self is too much, or not enough. If you dared to speak the truth, or take up space, rejection feels inevitable. So you overgive, over-adapt, quiet every instinct to claim your own needs. The fear whispers that asserting boundaries will end in abandonment. There is a haunting certainty. If you are fully yourself, no one will love you. So the sacrifice continues, each act of self-betrayal justified as care for others. The world calls it selflessness, but it erases the very self that could love and be loved for real. The cost isn't only personal, though the internal wounds cut deep. Over time, self-abandonment leaves a human shape, there, but hollowed out, quietly despairing. Relationships formed on a foundation of sacrifice become brittle, their intimacy conditional. Giving without receiving leads to invisible tally sheets of need and resentment. Real connection becomes impossible because no one ever truly meets you. The masked version is all you offer. Your softest truths go unsaid. Over time, your own desires become strange to you. Life grows heavy with obligation, light with joy. The presence of others becomes suffocating instead of soothing. Alone, you notice the real loss. Not that others value you less, but that you have forgotten how to value yourself. Look under the surface, and something vital has been surrendered. Not just happiness, but agency. The power to actually choose, rather than always react to others' wants. You find yourself uncertain of your own preferences, always waiting for someone else to decide your worth or your next step. The habit of self-erasure means even small decisions can overwhelm you. Over years, it can become impossible to distinguish what you truly want from what you've been conditioned to give. That is the gravity of this descent. You don't just lose connection with others, you lose connection with yourself. There's a grim irony in this well-intentioned path. The more you sacrifice yourself to belong, the further away true belonging slips. Others may appreciate the gesture, but real intimacy demands mutuality, not martyrdom. Without honest boundaries, relationships become transactional, a trade of invisibility for temporary peace. Your presence is felt, but never truly known. The ultimate cost is this: self-abandonment disguised as virtue becomes a pact with emptiness. And if nothing changes, the well you draw from gradually runs dry. What follows is a silent war inside you, a daily campaign to stay compliant, agreeable, safe. You feel a creeping hollowness, vague and hard to name, yet always there. Every time you mute your actual need or swallow a sharp feeling, the wound deepens. This is how loneliness can thrive even in a crowded room. He recognized this, not just as a personal crisis, but a kind of collective blindness. Here lies the truth no one wants to say out loud. Self-erasure is often welcomed by others until the invisible person finally erupts or fades away completely. You might play the role everyone loves, yet despise the person you've become inside. There is a quiet violence in becoming what's expected, ignoring everything that aches to be heard. But the spiral does not just affect you. When you twist yourself to fit others' comfort, their shadows start to define your limits as much as your own. And soon, resentment grows, directed at them, at yourself, at the entire arrangement. Even the smallest need unspoken collects in the dark corners. There, jealousy or bitterness curdle, feeding on what never sees daylight. Occasionally, you lash out or withdraw, confused by your own intensity. Guilt floods in, gluing the cycle back together, making it harder to speak up the next time. Each turn of this wheel is a lesson in powerlessness disguised as harmony. The cost is subtle but total. Intimacy gets exchanged for approval, connection traded for appeasement. He did not write about these dynamics as abstract puzzles. This was survival work, a question of what's left when you are always editing yourself to be palatable. In Modern Man in Search of a Soul, he lays the warning bare. Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. The line splits like lightning. Most learn to guard their darkness, not face it, let alone share it. Yet that is the membrane real belonging flows through, the flawed, not the flawless, parts of you. Here's the pivot, the fracture in old habits, the only raw key that fits. No intimacy is possible without revealing who you actually are, not just who you wish you were. Let that line crack open your version of connection. The turning point sits in the trembling moment when you admit, at least to yourself, that hiding your wounds cost you everything worthwhile. The gradual, exhausting labor of perfecting your image has bought you peace with others, but war within. Are you prepared to risk the discomfort of being exposed, if that is the only way to know, really know, who is actually beside you? Pretending keeps relationships stable but dead. Revealing fractures them, sometimes shatters them, but only then can anything true survive. People bargain for connection, but only receive it when their masks finally slip. There's a danger in thinking you can keep managing both, the version the world wants and the version you lock away. But the split is never perfect. Eventually, the hidden parts leak. In your tone, in your silences, in the brittle ways you react to tiny slights. The most honest thing you might manage is to say, "I am lonely," or "I am angry," even if the words make the room cold. Some think boundaries keep others out. More often, boundaries are what finally let you in. Without them, you are only ever guessing at your own appetite for joy or pain. The urge to self-abandon disguises itself as strength, but it's cowardice in reverse, a refusal to meet yourself fully, thereby guaranteeing that no one else ever can. Intimacy, real intimacy, asks you to bear your flaws into the open and accept the risk of being seen. The choice is laid bare. Peace built on self-erasure is never peace at all. Consider this, the memorable line, the one nothing else dares to whisper. Hiding your darkness only promises you more loneliness in the end. If you felt a chill, it is there for a reason. The line will follow you. It asks you to look straight on at the cost of hiding, the price your private self continues to pay. It dares you to recalibrate, to believe that your darkness is the bridge, not the barrier. The revelation stings. The antidote to isolation is never more perfection, only wider, riskier honesty. Nothing else will suffice. There is no shortcut past this turning point. You can spend years circling the perimeter of your own life, clinging to approval, avoiding rupture. Or you can walk through. The question doesn't change, but you do. Which pain will you choose? The pain of exposure or the pain of perpetual absence, even from yourself? The moment you dare to answer, everything you called connection is put to the test. Some relationships will shrink. Some might collapse. Yet those that survive, those few, will contain the only home worth living in. The ones where your flaws become common ground, not hidden shame. So the cycle breaks when you finally refuse to shrink, when you choose the loneliness of honesty over the emptiness of pretense. That's how he meant it. That's how the darkness integrates you and never again puts you to sleep. What you risk here is everything you ever thought would keep you safe. What you stand to gain is the truth. To be known and belong at last, as no one else can offer. But that threshold, crossing into vulnerability, has a cost. Pain comes first. The safety of false togetherness shatters, replaced by naked exposure. In psychology and alchemy, this conflict is brought to a head. There is no coming to consciousness without pain. Some will turn away at that door. Fear, tightly coiled for years, erupts when you let go of easy roles. Most people aren't ready to admit what hides beneath their acceptable personas. Someone who opens up, even a little, quickly sees who was really listening and who only clung to the mask. The cost is not abstract. Consider a worker who speaks up about burnout in a culture of silence. Friends distance themselves, uncomfortable with what's now visible. Or the child growing into adulthood, finally voicing family grievances, only to trigger shock, denial, and an edge of exile. These ruptures cut deep. Yet the old internal logic, the one whispering, "Keep the peace, hide your difference," was always a prison. The true turning point arrives in the aftermath as the dust settles. Something miraculous happens in the space left behind by lost approval, a small, unnerving freedom. With each honest exchange, the possibility of being chosen for yourself, not your disguise, emerges. This is not theory. Across cultures, outliers who break silence become nodes of new connection, sometimes forming entirely new tribes or movements. The gay teenager coming out, the reformer challenging workplace dogma, the artist showing unacceptable parts of themselves. These are real lives rebuilt at the cost of esteem from the fearful. Why is the risk so great? The mind is wired for belonging, and when survival once depended on the group's acceptance, exclusion meant danger. The shadow of that anxiety lingers, trembling through adult choices. Our brains signal threat at the prospect of being too much or too real. The ancient fear is that showing your pain will make you unlovable, a pariah. But if you never show yourself, you only ever receive conditional warmth, a daily performance where exhaustion takes root. Shrinking yourself to fit is a wound you reopen again and again, just to feel briefly held. But true connection never comes to the careful. What gets lost by remaining hidden is not just love, but the sense of having truly lived. In the undiscovered self, this other side of risk is spelled out. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. After the first collapse, after the cold shock of honesty, what grows is resilience and a fierce peace. A handful of relationships now proven, deepen beyond anything shallow approval ever held. There is laughter not tinged with anxiety, forgiveness not distorted by guilt. Even alone, the echo of self-betrayal begins to fade. Guilt softens into self-recognition. You find yourself able to speak, breathe, even fail, without the old compulsion to shrink. What's given up, approval, unbroken silence, fragile security, was never built to last. What stands in exchange, a life that is thick, undiluted, and singularly yours. Standing in this place, honesty stops feeling like annihilation. It is the only foundation that doesn't collapse in the long night. The loneliness of truth becomes, paradoxically, the most trustworthy companion. With each act of showing yourself, you confirm that you can survive the trembling aftermath. Over time, courage is no longer the earthquake. It becomes the ground itself. And that is the real home, the one you claimed, not inherited, waiting past the breaking point. True security comes from within, built upon the honesty of self-discovery. Embracing your truth transforms loneliness into a trusted companion. If this resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and comment below. What truth have you been avoiding to claim your real home?